Good morning. This is going to serve as your 29.1 lecture. And you'll kind of notice we've kind of jumped to a different part of the book, and that's kind of because we got to cover this stuff sooner rather than later. And it's all going to tie into the project we're doing every Friday, and that's due at the end of the semester. We're coming up on the halfway point. We're going to keep working towards doing that. So, 29.1 is all about marketing research. Second half is all about marketing surveys. So let's just dive right in. So research in general is a lot like what you do in real life before you potentially buy a product. And research, we might do a small amount of research. We might do no research if it's an impulsive buy. And we might do a whole lot of research. For example, if we were buying something that was expensive, like a car or a house. Now we're spending hours finding the best value or that meets our criteria more so than any other vehicle or any other house if we were buying one of those. So our objectives today, we're going to explain the steps in designing and conducting marketing research. We're going to compare primary and secondary data, and then we're going to collect and interpret marketing information. And hopefully we won't deal with that a lot. And then we'll identify elements in marketing research reports. So I don't have a lot of slides, but I have a good amount of information on each one. But here's the heart of the matter. Marketing research provides insight for a company to develop strategies and tactics that will hopefully increase sales and profits. Does it always work out that way? No, of course not. People and companies get a survey and they think they're headed in one direction, and sometimes that is not the correct direction to go. So here's our vocabulary for this section. We'll go through this as we go along, but this is potentially the first time you're seeing vocabulary that is completely foreign to most of you. A lot of what we've been talking about has some marketing, but a lot of economic and business review. And now we have fully diverged away from economics. So marketing research process, this is a 5-step process, and we will go through each one. So get these down real quick, but essentially the first step we're going to do is actually define the problem. What is it we're trying to understand and potentially fix? We're going to go through then step 2, a process of getting data. Whether that's through a number of different methods, and we'll talk about that as well. We'll then actually analyze said data, put some thought into it, and try and figure out what it means or what it's trying to tell us. And then we will recommend a solution. Hey, let's do A, B, C, or D. And then we will hopefully apply those results in some way, shape, or form. So, formal definition of the problem, and that occurs when a business clearly identifies a problem that it needed to solve. And what is needed to solve it, sorry. So a business might say, hey, we have a carbon footprint. There are a significant group of people growing up that believe that climate change is occurring, and we can also make these investments and potentially lower our future costs and have great publicity, great marketing, and this is a positive things on a number of levels. So let's fix our carbon footprint and go carbon neutral. And you're seeing a lot of companies set dates and where they're trying to be completely carbon neutral and not have a carbon impact on the environment. And they're using a lot of different things to go about that, whether that's putting solar panels up, which tend to pay for themselves, which is a great investment as well as a positive marketing vehicle, to running power off of alternative methods. And some of that I can think of off the top of my head would be using garbage dumps that naturally produce methane, burning that methane to create power for large scale factories. So that is your formal definition of the problem. So, and then when we're talking about problems, a lot of times we're getting into the concept of, hey, we're going to have a survey. So with that, how much does a survey cost? And first thing that popped into my head was a land survey. that's obviously not what we're talking about, but just for information, land survey costs $75 to $450. And then website here called entrepreneur.com, the average phone survey costs $40. But the total cost of that survey is $500 to $15,000 in order to fully complete that survey. And what's that saying is, well, we need a certain amount of data to say our survey is valid or within X margin of error, plus or minus 5%, right? We can still have probably conclusive data once we interview enough people. And if you haven't taken statistics yet, this is one of the most common thoughts in statistics. It only takes a couple thousand people in a survey to really get the full grasp of the picture. The survey's not really going to change much at that point if you're surveying the right people. And I guess what I'm saying is, if you survey 2,000 people, you survey 10,000 people, your results will be in a very small margin of error. Same concept goes if you were to flip a coin heads or tails. Whether you do that flip 100 times or 1,000 times, your results are going to be very similar. So that survey is going to be part of obtaining data, and we have two forms of data that we tend to obtain, and that's primary and secondary. Primary data is your firsthand, you're the one creating that survey that we just talked about. And then secondary data is you're going somewhere else for a survey. So you're going to get it from an institution or companies that actually get data or make data. Because there are companies out there whose job and purpose for making money is just to make data. So those are your definitions of primary and secondary data. And I'll leave this up for a couple more seconds before going on. Alright, so some examples of secondary data include census information that we gather as a country every 10 years. Tax records, GPS records are used for data. In fact, online, that is how you pay for social media. You pay for social media with your private data. They know how long you stare at a video, how quickly you swipe up and down, what you're actually looking at, and they target all of us for purchases of various types. That's why you'll see, if you look at something on Amazon, you'll see that item pop up on another website, because they know the more you see it, the more you are more likely to actually go ahead and finalize that purchase. So before we get going, I'm going to show you some examples of secondary data, and I have this GitHub website pulled up here. And this is a list of amazing public data sets. So when it comes to your project and you're looking for some way to tie your problem into your project, this is an awesome place to go. And here's the table of contents. And because I like numbers, I'll go here to finance and the St. Louis Fed and see if we can find something on the St. Louis consumer price hold for a halt. And I'm just moving around right now, see what type of data. So this is the consumer price index. This is a measure of one of those economic indicators that we talked about for all urban consumers and all items, US city average. And you can see since the 80s, there has been a steady trend of the CPI moving up as we go through time. So just interesting, and actually, it looks like it might dip down a little bit towards the end of this year, and then it'll probably go back up. So just real quick, interesting way to show you some data, and didn't want to spend too much time, but just to show you how much data is actually out there. And I'll back up just to show you this website is loaded with literally all types of stuff is on here. And that's just the finance section. These are all different data sets, or taking you to locations that have their own data. So, but back to this. Talked about data. All right. So there are different processes or different ways we can gain data that are, and we're going to talk about, these can be either primary or secondary. Primary if you're doing them, secondary if someone else is doing them and you're getting it from them. So put these two up. Survey method, well, just this one. Survey method is a research technique in which information is gathered from people through the use of surveys and questionnaires. This is one I think we're all very familiar with, and we will be working on this not today, but this week. We'll be creating our own survey for a number of different topics. And then a sample is a part of the target population that just represents the entire population. So if I ask 10 people in this class room a question and they answer, likelihood is that that will be similar to the entire class answering the question. So get that down, and then I will keep on rolling. All right, the observation method and point of sale research. So the observation method is a taking in data through just watching. So, and I have a good example of that, but essentially you're just watching the actions of people and recording this through cameras or by actual people writing notes down. There's a bunch of ways they do this. Sometimes they'll put a kid in a room with a toy and just see how the kid plays with the toy. They won't tell him anything. Maybe, hey, here's a toy. And then they'll just let him go. See what happens. They want to see a bunch of things. Is the kid able to naturally play with the toy? Is it naturally intuitive? Or do they have to change something up? Do they need to make something different in order to get their goal to properly work or work appropriately? And then the other one, point of sale research, is when, hey, you're going to watch and then watch what the person does and then interview afterwards to try and understand whatever they were doing and their purpose behind it. A lot of times this will happen after the sale, right? And we might say, hey, can I ask you some questions now that you've purchased the product? And we're trying to find out why they made the purchase that they did. So this might be even be seen as the surveys that you get as you're walking out after doing something. Hey, thank you for buying this. If you want, fill out the survey at the bottom. Trying to understand what drove the decision that the buyer or consumer made. So hopefully you got those down. If not, have me stop. But here is observation, and this is called a heat map. And this is a convenience store. So what people went ahead and did was, this marketing group, they watched for heat signatures. So they used a thermal camera to say, hey, this is the most traveled area of a convenience store. So if you're a company that sells impulsive items, you want to be where it's red because this is where people travel. This back corner right here, the two beverage coolers where they meet, that is blue, and it's obviously cold because people don't go there. So what's back there? I'm honestly not sure, but the point is, you can even see here, here's the salty snacks aisle. This is where chips and pretzels would be. And it's obviously, this is where people usually don't go, right? So how do these companies get out of this spot into other spots in the store where more people are so they can have some type of impulsive reaction where someone actually goes and grabs their product? And so this is part of that observation method. So another method is called experimental method. And this kind of sounds exactly the way it intends to. This is almost like taking science into marketing research. We're going to change one variable in potentially one location and see the impact of changing that variable. So almost truly like a science experiment. We're going to do something just like a science experiment. We'll have our control and our variable, and we'll see the impact or change. And sometimes this is good, sometimes it's bad, but it is an awesome way to test an idea on a small level to see if it really works. And your formal definition is there. Technique in which a researcher observes the results of changing one or more marketing variables while keeping all the other variables constant under controlled conditions. So we take our usual Tide box. Excuse me, I had to sneeze. So we have our usual Tide container, pretty standard here, and we change our one variable. Hey, we're going to change our Tide in this specific supermarket, and maybe it's one store or a chain, and we're going to see what happens with our new box, right? And does it actually go up? And maybe this is more eco-friendly to the environment because it's made of cardboard. It also might be cheaper for us to make than this plastic one. And now we're going to find out whether or not if this box actually increases sales. And we'll look at a bunch of factors like, hey, maybe we can fit more of these boxes on the shelf, which makes our customer, our retailer customer, happier, right? Instead of putting these up. And then maybe the consumer hopefully likes them more and buys more of our eco-friendly design on our packaging. So it's just an example of the experimental technique. So back into obtaining data, secondary data and primary data. Here are some examples of sources. Your primary data sources are survey, interview, observation, and experiment. Those are 4 methods that we talked about. And our sources for secondary data would be like our GitHub and internet, US and state government, specialized research companies, business publications, and trade organizations. Give you a second to get all that data down. Alright. So I'm playing with the colors to see if this is easier to read on the screen. Let me know in class if this is better. I don't have the ability to easily manipulate these pictures that are provided because they're put as pictures and not put as actual elements of the PowerPoint. So this is advantages and disadvantages of secondary data. Advantages, it can be easily obtained. Sometimes it can be free of charge and on the internet, and it can be corporate, public, or part of college libraries. It can also be available for purchase, and the sources like the U.S. Census Bureau, where that information is very public. Some disadvantages. Sometimes you can't find the exact data set you want or that you're trying to get. You might spend a lot of time doing that. So, and there is little to no data for new or really innovative ideas, and then it can oftentimes be inaccurate or not, like I said, not exactly what you're looking for. It can also be expensive at times to get exactly what you want. So just some advantages and disadvantages of secondary data. I'll leave this up for another second. I'll be quiet for a minute. So step 3, analyzing the data. So data analysis and data mining, next 2 vocab words. It's a process of compiling, analyzing, and interpreting the results of primary and secondary data collection. And I'll have some examples in a second. And then data mining is examining large databases in order to generate new information. And maybe we're looking at 2 subsets of data and comparing them together. Maybe we're saying, well, hey, all the males of this group did this and all the females did that. And we're starting to take other data sets and put them together. And you see this a lot with things like anything in the medical field has so much data in it because you're trying to help people and not hurt people. And we have all these different combinations of new drugs that we're experimenting with and new techniques for delivering them. So data is super critical. So here we go. This is responses from the survey the marketing classes did last year. We had 355 responses, and they went around school and they had students fill out an anonymous survey about whether or not they vaped. So there was demographic questions, how old are you? And obviously the biggest group was 17-year-olds followed by 16-year-olds, and then the other ages here. And then, have they actually ever vaped? 55% said no, 44% said yes. And I'm sure there is some margin of error here. Maybe there's a 5% swing in either direction for these. But that seems pretty standard and wouldn't dramatically change your results. So, and we asked a whole series of questions, and I can pull that up in class if you guys want to talk about it more. But this was the questionnaire we did as a class last year, and you can see where this data can become really relevant and help you kind of make a case for whatever you're trying to do. So after we've analyzed all the data, we might make some recommendations. So we would take our data, have some conclusions, and we might say something like, we recommend at the very least kids and adults understand the dangers of using a vaping device. So that would be just a super basic recommendation and just trying to tie back to the example from before. Recommendations can be more, and you can take the recommendation and actually apply some type of solution. If we went back to our experimental, right, we're here and we say, hey, every store we put this in, we have a 10% increase in sales. Well, that is a lot better than what's going on here. We might also have a cost deduction because of the package is cheaper. We're probably going to we recommend expanding this product line to as many stores as possible. Might be the results. Or to every store, make this the common package that we sell tied in because people prefer it. It has made the consumer and customer a lot happier. Catching briefly back up to where we were. So how do we apply the results? A couple things. We may need more research. We may have more questions now. And then as we do things like, hey, we apply that new Tide package to every store, how does that change the data further? Did we just have a small amount of success? Is there something else that we changed that we didn't understand when we did this? And then success, true success, is always reflected in higher profits in a business. But we would apply the results and we would do something like, if we go back to our vaping example, we might, do we make changes to laws? Do we hold businesses accountable for selling to minors? Do we hold parents accountable? We can do the opposite, completely back off and say, at such age, minors should make their own decisions. I don't know, and honestly, I'm not trying to get into that from a political standpoint, but the point is, you do something to make a change, right? And to help everyone understand what's changing and what's different. So hopefully you got all this or something on this to understand applying the results. Our 5-step process here again, make sure you have this. I'll leave this up for a minute and you can add in any data you don't. This is just another way to look at that original slide that had the 5 steps on it. And it's just a review of what we did today. And I'll leave this up here for another minute. And pause if you need it paused, or that's it. We're done. Sweet. I hope you enjoyed 29.1 and 29.2. We'll get into details with actual surveys next week. But first, we're going to actually write some surveys. It'll be fun this week. All right. Enjoy and have a great Monday.